In the latter decades of the 19th century, British expatriates, workers, engineers, and students arriving in Belgian industrial and university cities, brought association football with them. The precise dates and routes of the game's introduction are not fully documented, but by the 1880s and 1890s organized clubs were already forming in Brussels and other cities, spreading the sport through social networks that mixed British influence with local enthusiasm. Within a generation, the game had moved from expatriate pastime to a pursuit that Belgian-born players were making their own. In 1895, a group of club representatives gathered in Brussels and founded the Union Royale Belgique de Sociétés de Football Association, making Belgium one of the earliest countries in continental Europe to establish a national football federation. That decision gave the game an institutional spine before it had a mass audience. But founding a federation and funding a federation are two different things. The early clubs drew heavily from the professional and middle classes who could afford boots and match fees, a pattern common across continental Europe in the sport's formative years. Among the clubs active in this era were Racing Club de Bruxelles and FC Legiois, while Club Bruges was also among the older established clubs in the country. Working-class Belgians largely watched from the sidelines in the sport's earliest years. This social composition meant the game's initial growth was narrower than in England or Scotland, where industrial workers had already claimed the terraces as their own. Then came 1900, and something no one expected. Belgium sent a football team to the Paris Olympic Games, becoming one of the first nations to play football at an Olympiad. They lost to a formidable Great Britain side, but the exposure mattered. Belgian newspapers carried match coverage, and the sport began reaching audiences beyond its original bourgeois patrons. Whether that Olympic appearance accelerated football's broader popularity or merely coincided with it, the game's audience in Belgium widened noticeably in the years that followed. Through the 1900s and 1910s, RSC Anderlecht had not yet risen to dominance. It was clubs like Daring Club de Bruxelles and Union Saint-Gilloise who filled the trophy cabinet. Union Saint-Gilloise won a remarkable number of national championships in the sport's early decades, building a dynasty that southern Brussels supporters treated like a civic religion. But the First World War shattered everything. German occupation suspended the league, scattered players, and cost the lives of Belgian footballers who might otherwise have defined the sport's next era. After 1918, football in Belgium rebuilt faster than its stadiums. The interwar years saw clubs from Liège, Bruges, and Brussels compete fiercely in a league that was professionalizing in everything but name. Crowds grew. Radio broadcasting arrived in Belgium during the 1920s, and over time football commentary became part of the medium's output, contributing to the sport's growing place in national life. But the game's geography was quietly dividing along Wallonia's industrial valleys and Flanders' textile towns, a split that would resurface in boardrooms decades later. RSC Anderlecht's rise after the Second World War was not accidental. The club invested in more structured and professional approaches to coaching and organization at a time when rivals still relied on part-time arrangements, and by the 1950s Anderlecht had become Belgium's dominant force. They won their first national title in 1947 and rarely looked back. The Brussels club's model, centralized, well-funded, and forward-looking, set a template that other Belgian clubs spent decades resenting and copying. Belgium reached its first FIFA World Cup in 1930, one of only 13 nations present in Uruguay, but the squad returned having lost both of their group matches and failing to progress. Qualification remained inconsistent for decades after. The Red Devils would miss entire World Cup cycles, a pattern that frustrated a public that could see genuine talent in the domestic league. The gap between club quality and national team performance was real, and it nagged at every generation of Belgian football administrators. The rupture came in the 1980s. Jan Selmens, Enzo Schifo, and goalkeeper Jean-Marie Pfaff anchored a Red Devils squad that reached the World Cup semi-finals in Mexico in 1986, losing to Diego Maradona's Argentina. Belgium. A semi-final. The country had never been that close. Then Pfaff retired. Schifo aged. The pipeline emptied. Between the late 1990s and early 2000s, Belgium failed to qualify for multiple major tournaments. The Belgian Football Association responded by overhauling its youth development system, introducing broader technical standards and more coordinated approaches to scouting and coaching across the top flight. The details of individual mandates varied and evolved over time, but the direction was clear: structural investment in the next generation. It was unglamorous administrative work. But that quiet effort is central to any honest answer to the question planted at the top of this film. It explains what finally unlocked the golden generation. By the 2010s, Eden Hazard, Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, and Thibaut Courtois had all emerged from Belgium's rebuilt youth infrastructure. The national team climbed to the top of FIFA's world rankings, a position they held for a sustained period. At the 2018 World Cup in Russia, Roberto Martinez's Red Devils finished third. Not first. Third. The ceiling had shifted, but it hadn't vanished. Belgian football's arc runs from British expatriates' kit bags and industrial yards to the world's top ranking, but the question was never whether Belgium could produce great players. It was whether a small, linguistically divided country could build institutions durable enough to produce them generation after generation. The 1895 founders in Brussels, arguing over rulebooks in a borrowed hall, understood something that took the rest of the world a century to test: the game belongs to whoever organizes it first.